710 ESPN Seattle presents Bob and Groz's One More Thing.
Powered by the law offices of Heidi Hunt.
So long, Al. All right, Al Davis, one of the most iconic figures in all of sports, as far as I'm concerned, passed away over the weekend. I thought Bill Plaschke of the LA Times may have put it perfectly when he said the greatest villain in the history of sports.
He really was. I mean, he's famous for a lot of phrases. You know, the opponent's quarterback must go down and go down hard. Is what he would say. Just win, baby. He was a guy toward the end.
The greatness of the Raiders is in their future.
Yeah, he was a character, and people call him the Crypt Keeper and all these. I mean, he was just a guy that had a lot of different faces, a lot of different opinions on him. You heard about his loyalty on one hand, but then if you talk to a guy like Marcus Allen, he'd have a completely different opinion.
He nearly ruined his career. He benched him for 2 years before he let him go to Kansas City. Nearly cost him going to the Hall of Fame. I talked to people in Irwindale who he took $15 million from, put it in his pocket, and went to Oakland. They might have a different feel about him. And
how many times did he sue the league?
Oh God!
Numerous.
Any number of times I can think. I had two experiences with Al Davis. One was one that I kind of wear as a badge of honor because it has happened to some others as well. And in fact, I was reading a story about when Hunter Thompson met him over the weekend. That it almost happened to him. But I was one of the guys at practice, and this is when they were in Oxnard, Northern California, where they were training, and was actually there. Was young. I just moved out from from back east, and was at camp. And Al would kind of walk by and whisper to guys and everything. I noticed him kind of looking at me and doing that. And basically, he had one lieutenant, this guy named Al Locasal, who kind of did and ran everything for him. And he went over, and I said, he says, "Come here." He says, "Yeah." He said, "Al was just talking about you." I said, "Yeah, I noticed." And he says, "Yeah, he'd like you to leave."
What'd you do?
I left.
No, what did you do to get him to ask you to
Not a
leave?
thing. He didn't know who I was.
So he just wanted you gone.
Yeah, I mean, because remember, he was a guy who was paranoid beyond belief. And as I've come to read stories, I had a guy say, "Kid, don't worry, it happens like 40, 50 times every training camp." And I've talked to other guys who have had the same experience. So he did have that kind of paranoia. Of course, I never would have made it to Seattle if it wasn't for the Raiders.
Yeah.
When they were the Los Angeles Raiders, because that's how I got my. So I was doing news down there. Did a sports. They had no sports tape for coming up here, and so I did a show with Jim Plunkett on the Raider pregame show, and it got me my gig up here. But the loyalty story, right? So my brother-in-law, when the Raiders moved down to L.A., Al lives in Marina Del Rey. I think he kept his place there.
It's a nice place. I live down there.
I think it's still his place. I mean, he was living down there when you were down there. He has been down there since the Raiders went down there in the first place.
Never ran into him at the gym, though. Odd.
I don't think he spent much time at Gold's Gym, which is I know why you went down there, because you had it right on the beach there. But he lived there. So anyway, this was back when the Raiders first went down there. This was during the time there's no direct TV, no dish, no small satellite dish. If you wanted to have a satellite dish, and they did have them then, they were those big monsters. So they had, not surprisingly, Marina Del Rey, which is, I mean, it's almost like living in a dock. I mean, you live there. It's not a lot of land. There's nothing like that.
No, you're right by the water.
Yeah,
right?
it's pretty much living in a it's nice. I mean, it's very, very nice.
Very nice, yeah.
They had absolutely cannot put up a satellite dish. It's an eyesore. You can't have anything like this. You can't have it. So, as it turns out, from way back, my brother-in-law has a construction company down there. Knew Al Davis' secretary, who, by the way, was a secretary then, still is now, the same person. And he said, "Well, actually, I've got a thing that I've figured out where I can take it and make it look like his umbrella that is sitting out there in his patio, and it'll actually be a dish where you can get everything." And she's like, "I think he'd love that. I mean, I think that'd be great." So my brother-in-law put it in his place in Marina Del Rey, so it just looked like a regular umbrella, but it was big enough that it had a satellite dish. So it was important maybe for 2 or 3 more years. Then the technology got to the point where it didn't matter. But from that point on, my brother-in-law, even to this day, plays in every Raider golf tournament, got tickets for every Raider game he wanted because he helped
him
out.
up.
Not only did he hook him up, but I don't think there's anything and this is what his secretary said to my brother-in-law, there's nothing Al likes better than getting over on someone or something. And this, you know what I mean? And this totally felt like getting over on someone. So he, for 20 years, I mean, that was 20 years ago at least. 20 years after that, he never forgot it, always. So that loyalty thing was true.
That's a good side. And there are a lot of people that were, I mean, you saw Hugh Jackson after the game yesterday. He's on
awfully
the
emotional,
sideline crying. He's he's in the locker room crying. And
John Madden said his quote in USA Today was he lost his best friend.
yeah, I mean, people either loved him or, there are a lot of people that had bad things to say about him, but it's interesting, and it happens anytime somebody passes. Doesn't matter what they did during their time on Earth. People trip all over themselves to get up there and talk about what a great person they were, and boy, he meant everything. And meanwhile, when he was alive, they probably hadn't talked to him in years, were ripping him.
True. A lot of people, plenty of people are at least coming out and saying they didn't like him all that much.
Well, and what was the one thing we'd always hear about the Raiders? They are not going to improve until Al Davis dies. And I know that's harsh, but you heard that from everybody.
Well, for 10 years, I mean, I heard guys yesterday, Howie Long and Strahan on the pregame shows lamenting that if you were young, you're in your 20s or early 30s, the only Raiders are kind of a joke. I mean, they've had very little success. In fact, if you take a look, their record during that stretch is very close to the Bengals' record during that stretch, including playoff appearances,
bad
like
teams,
that.
Bad draft picks.
But I'll
seasons.
tell you one thing that I think everyone should be able to agree upon. This was a guy who started as a scout, then became an assistant coach, then became the head coach, then became one of the owners, then became the principal owner, then became the commissioner of the American Football League, then went back to becoming the principal owner. We will never, ever see anyone do anything like that again, in my opinion, in any sport. I mean, you will never see anyone do that.
Remarkably unique figure. There are many like him.
Just win, baby.